Let's move on to our second caller, Camo 365. Oh, whilst we're waiting for him to join the call, here's an interesting question for people who are watching. Just 1 second, Camo, in which country is the furthest point from the centre of the Earth? There's one for you to think about as we introduce Camo. Welcome to the show, Camo.
Oh, how you going? Can you hear me?
Can indeed.
Good
and
stuff.
We can also see you now. What have you got for us?
Bonus. I seen a documentary probably 6 months ago or so, stating that a few historians had a bit of a look back digging around on Jesus and found that he was a Buddhist, and apparently he's buried in what was known as Kashmir, around India or something. I just, chasing some different opinions on somebody that's better at researching things than me.
I thought he was a kung fu master.
I mean, which historical document do you take? I mean, there's almost no accurate history written contemporaneously of his existence. I mean, there's probably lots of messianic prophets that passed through the area, and I guess Yeshua was a fairly common name.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it had to be a Yeshua who also had a brother named James, and that gets trickier.
Yeah.
What was the source? Do you remember where you read it? Camo? Where did we find that he was a Buddhist?
I think it was BBC put out.
Right.
It was BBC put out a couple of documentaries.
Okay,
I'm not too sure about books.
To make sure we're talking about the same guy, are we talking about the Jesus that was born before 4 BC, or are we talking about the guy that was born after 6 CE?
Are we talking about the Jesus that has a completely different lineage in one book from another book? I can't remember which the two books are, but he's got a totally different lineage.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, again, going back to what we were saying before. How can people take this book seriously? And you say there are no inconsistencies in it. There is one absolutely striking inconsistency. The lineage of Jesus from, was it Noah or whatever? I can't remember, or Abraham. I mean, they're just totally different.
No, here's what boggles my mind, DPR. He has no lineage on the patrilineal side because his father is God, which means he is not related to any of the people in Joseph's line except by marriage. So those are not his ancestors, right? You really have to wonder, what was the other half of his genetic makeup? What did God come up with?
And it's a very serious question. Given the fact that the Holy Spirit came upon Mary without her knowledge, does that mean she was raped? And if the Holy Spirit is part of a Trinity, does that mean that she was gang raped?
And if it is a Trinity that we're talking, well, actually, it couldn't be a Trinity, could it? Because one of them hasn't been created.
Right? So that would be.
Yeah. So. So I was thinking, okay, well, it's a three-way or is it a four-play? Never mind. I'll just leave it. I'm just going to just settle with DPR Jones said that the Holy Ghost came upon Mary. I'll just leave it with that comment.
Well, there does seem to be a lot of emphasis on the lineage of Jesus on the father's side. And we know for a fact that, we know according to the Bible that Jesus had no earthly father. So he's not related to Adam on his father's side. He's not related to any of the required, except by marriage. Now, if that satisfies the requirement under Jewish law, then so be it. But that's not, and she was unmarried at the time, right? So you have a single mom.
But how would you be married at the time? What constitutes that? I mean, does she have a ring? Did they have that tradition? Exactly, where is the dividing line between married and unmarried?
I don't. You have to talk to a biblical scholar. I would assume there would be a Jewish ceremony.
I
know they
get that.
had a Jewish wedding. I'm sure.
According to the Bible, it seems that the ceremony of marriage is when you cleave into someone.
Oh, I don't think so, Aaron. I think they had a ceremony.
I fear this conversation is degenerating. I would like to say that, Cameron, I suspect that if I'd not, excuse me, if I'd not just got this book yesterday, and which has meant that I've read literally about 2 pages of it, I suspect we would be in a better position to answer your question. There seems to be, as Concordance has stated, no contemporaneous record of Jesus. The earliest works, if Non-Stamper is correct, and I think he's taken it from this book. Sorry, I should say the book is Bart Ehrman's Lost Christianities. The earliest works are probably Paul in 50 CE. Gospels earliest likely is 70 CE, so 40 years after Jesus has died. There seems to be a huge gap between, and if you ask theists this, what happened after Jesus died? What was the next major step? They won't really be able to answer you. Some of them may come up with, the Council of Nicaea, but that was like 325, 326 CE. There's a huge gap there, and this book, I suspect, it addresses exactly what was going on. I mean, we know, for example, that Marcion was fairly prominent. I can't remember. I think he was late 2nd century, early 3rd century. I can't remember. But he was trying to set up a church that didn't have anything to do with the Old Testament, a new Jesus church, if you like, and was almost successful. But I think these are really interesting questions, but I don't think any of us are in a position really to answer it. But AronRa wants to try.
Stop calling me. All right, so we had early Christian authors that gave very bizarre accounts of Jesus, like I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but there was one guy that went on about telling the Romans that whenever we propound, these attributes of Jesus, know that we're not suggesting anything different than what you already believe about Jupiter, and so on. But in his list of things that he attributes to Jesus, there's this insinuation that there are stories about Jesus strong as a lion, and these stories didn't survive. What the hell is he talking about? Now, this is from somewhere around the 1st century. So what feats of Herculean strength were attributed to Jesus that somehow never made it into the New Testament? And why didn't it? I mean, these are classic works from like the 1st century. So why aren't they in here?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're also aware that there are many books that didn't make it into the final version of the Bible. Many Gospels that were omitted, and one has to wonder why.
And not just Gospels either. There were a whole bunch of books that are referenced elsewhere in the Bible. I mean, that where the Bible actually tells you to go check the reference in this other book, but the other book was removed, which is what makes it really amusing. That if the Bible were composed by God, then why would you have chapters that are referring to other chapters as you read in this other chapter, which has now been removed? So you can't read it anymore, and it doesn't exist anymore. But I'm God, I'm infallible, and I'm perfect, and I put this all together for you.
It gets even worse because in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we find evidence that there are actually 2 different versions of 2 specific books. I'm sorry, I can't remember which they are. But how can you have 2 different versions of the definitive Word of God?
Maybe it's polytheism.
PPR, you asked what happened in that intervening space. What happened was a flourishing, and I think that will be in that book, of lots of different versions of Christianity. And someone said, we've got to put a break on this. The hierarchy, the power structure evolved over 100 years to where you realize that if we're ever going to gain power, the co-opting of this powerful religious belief, we're going to have some sort of a paramilitary, para-legislative, para-judicial system
If I may, I don't
educate.
want to cut you off too quickly, but I think that's exactly what did happen. It was Constantine, wasn't it? He set up the Council of Nicaea.
No, even before that, there were the battles over, Arianism and Gnostic Christians were run to the ground. You had persecution of one Christian group by another. When it was small, it was very easy to sort of integrate it into this very diverse belief. But then someone realized we now have 18 versions of Christianity. And no one of them has enough power to, keep the homodoxy, keep the faith on a single path. And that's the point where it went from being, this sort of messianic revelationary and end times cult, and it became this sort of Catholic and Byzantine, and the power structures evolved very rapidly. And from that, we get this entirely new system of beliefs that have very little to do with the original Jewishness of Jesus, right? The whole Jewish and honoring the prophets and keeping the Judaic tradition alive. We tossed all that out, and it became a very Roman thing and a very Byzantine thing.
We have to look at the way that the Bible is described, or not the way it's described, but the way that it's developed, as Concordance is talking about. We are not following a scientific path. We're not trying to determine what the truth actually was. They're laying out what is an approved document or an approved doctrine. This is what we're going to believe. They just lay it out based on their own authority, and then they say that anybody who deviates from that will be killed as a heretic. And that's really the way of going about it. So again, we're not looking at trying to divine truth. We're not trying to determine reality. They're making up a story. They're making it. It's like a political gesture.
There's another area, what I perceive to be a huge gap, and that is in the account of Jesus himself. And again, as I say, I was reading Matthew the other day. And Matthew's actually one of only two of the four, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that actually refers to the birth of Jesus. And again, his account is totally different. I think it's Luke gives the other account. I can't remember. Totally different stories about, and people say there's no inconsistency. Of course there are. But anyway, leave that aside. There's then a gap. They talk about him up until his birth, and then suddenly nothing. There's this huge gap until he's about 30 and he starts on his mission. Why was he? What was he doing? Well, we've got some idea that he was a carpenter. Why was he waiting around for so long? Why did it suddenly? What promoted him to suddenly start preaching?
Because even for an infallible deity, that pubescent period can be embarrassing, and you just don't want to talk about that time of your life.
The answer to the question I posed before, what is the point on Earth furthest from the center of Earth? It actually is in Ecuador, because of the fact that the Earth is, help me.
An oblate spheroid.
Oblique spheroid, thank you. It's wider at the circumference. So the actual point furthest from the center of the Earth is in Ecuador. And I did see someone post it, so well done to you.
Because it's on the equator, and it's also one of the tallest mountains in the world.
Yeah. And I did write the name down, but I wouldn't be able to pronounce it if I did. Hang on, it's spelled Chimborazo. But being dyslexic, I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. We're joined by what's now becoming a regular caller, Samuel. How are you?
Hello, I'm good. Coffee this time.
All is well then. How can we help you today?
Just a couple of questions. I haven't had any personal experience with faith healers per se, but I've seen a few of them in my area. What can we do to, what can we do as the atheist community do to counter these faith healers and help protect the innocently deceived?
Demand that they succumb to scientific scrutiny.
Change the web queries. You don't know how many people discover these faith healers through the internet. Their internet presence is eclipsing their TV presence, not for the old ladies sitting at home, the shut-ins, but for that new group of people that are coming in. That is the web generation. So if you have access to a blog, if you have access to a website, if you have any kind of web presence, you can help out by putting up articles detailing the fact that they're frauds, detailing any consequences you know of, and replicate it as many times as possible, because those hits get pushed towards the top. Now, you can't overcome the commercial hit generators, but that is exactly where all the new converts are going to end up coming from around the world. They're going to be watching the programs online and using their PayPal accounts to donate money. You need to attack them where they are really exposed, where they're really out there hunting for new recruits, for new victims.
And while Concordance is giving the right attack from the advertising standpoint, I mean, the one that I suggested was the one that James Randi went for, where you hold them accountable for the things that they actually do, where you follow up the backstory on some of these people, if it's possible to do that. You know, interview some of these people, if you can find them, the people that were supposedly healed on camera, find out what their ailments were, find out what documentation there is, do an expose of that sort, until we realize that this guy has absolutely nothing to show. And you're never going to be able to stop them, as DPR Jones has already shown. You can't stop some of these people. They have absolutely no compunction about finding other ways around the legal system so that they can continue to bilk little old ladies however they need to.
And you can also write letters to the broadcasters. Now, with mixed success, but if you want something you can do, notifying the broadcasters of the consequences of having their programming on the air may or may not have an impact. But again, if you're looking for something to do, a letter can be an effective way, especially if it's a write-in campaign. If we can organize ourselves into a community, that's the kind of thing that we can do. We can target Sky and whether or not Peter Popoff. I was watching, we have Dish Network here, and Peter Popoff has an hour-and-a-half show on Sunday mornings at 3 or 4 a.m. So they're still out there. They're darn hard to beat because they have good lawyers. They're slippery. They have no concern about their reputability as a whole, because most people come to them blind. They come to them with no prior knowledge. And that's why I'm saying get the message out as often as you can, so that when someone types in Peter Popoff, the first word they see after his name is Peter Popoff, liar, fraud, scam artist. You know, bring that stuff to light. It's just astounding to me that he is still on the air after all the work that people like James Randi and others have done to demonstrate the kind of person he really is. And don't let your friends and your family fall for it. Don't let it go past. Don't be a jerk about it.
Well, Concordance, if I may, I've just bunged into Google search engine Peter Popoff. The first hit, obviously, Wikipedia. The second one, his website. Third one, back to his old tricks. I think that is a site I've seen before. And the fourth hit is the YouTube video about James Randi debunks Peter Popoff. So it's not too far down the list. But, I mean, I'm not sure to what extent you're aware of the efforts that I went to try and get Peter Popoff removed from television in the United Kingdom. And indeed, he already had been in 2008. The regulatory body, Ofcom, had his license revoked. So what does he do? As you say, he's got some good lawyers. He goes to Iceland. He gets a European license in Iceland, which means that he can broadcast into the United Kingdom, and our regulatory body cannot do a thing about it. And the minister, Jeremy, got to be careful when you say this, Jeremy Hunt, I've been in touch with him. He just is not interested in doing anything about it. Iceland, I've been in touch with them. They're not interested in doing anything about it. So efforts are being made by some people, and I like to think that I'm doing what I can, but to no effect at the moment.
Yeah, well, look what happens Look at this. Look at this. Okay, we have Kent Hovind, for example, runs the Creation Ministries thing. I can't remember what he calls it. Creation Science Ministries, I think is what it is. This guy goes to prison for fraud and does not even impede his ministry's annual draw for funds. What does it take? When this guy that goes around kicking the little old ladies, when he kicks in some 86-year-old woman's clavicle and she has to be hospitalized about it, he's not going to have any repercussions from that. He's a faith healer causing an injury, and it's not going to be visited back on him. James Randi testified that he had seen, he tried to go visit some of the people that were healed by Peter Popoff, and in one case he shows up as they were taking her out of the house dead on a gurney because she had thrown her medication up on stage believing she didn't need it anymore, and now she's died. And these repercussions don't come back to the faith healer. They completely skirt them.
So I wonder if it would be effective to notify the local media whenever some event happens, to let the local news channel or news outlet know about these, allegations of fraud, or young boys found in his home, or whatever kind of bad things that happen, making sure that it gets airtime just via suggestions, editorials in the local newspaper. It's an awful lot of effort to put in, and it feels like a drop in a giant bucket. Or spitting in the ocean. There's almost no effect whatsoever. But if it's something that matters to you, then you have to put in the volunteer PR effort of web media. That's how people access this information. The elderly are not a reliable source of income for these fraudsters. They're going to have to start recruiting from younger and younger groups, and that's a much more informed and much more critical group of people who rely on the internet as a primary research source.
And with that being
if I could throw in one other suggestion, this that I have here, it's not very easy to see. These are the gimmicks. It's not the whole thing that he sent me. These are the gimmicks that Peter Popoff has sent me in the last few months. Including, I can't even remember what that is. It looks like a bag of drugs. And some nice little sticky labels, acorns and everything. This costs him money. And he also, I keep all the return envelopes because he has to pay for those as well. I've tried this before. Why not flood his website with requests? And he'll send you all of this. And as I say, it's going to cost him money. And use the return envelopes to send him a brick back. Just a thought.
You do have to use them for him to have to pay for it, though, right?
Yeah.
It's tied to his account?
Yeah. That's my understanding. But also, there's, I think if it's in America, if it is a free return envelope, you can literally attach it to anything. And I have seen people on YouTube videos literally sending him a brick. And that, because it's higher weight, it costs him an awful amount of money. It probably, again, is a drop in the ocean. But hey. Samuel, was there another point you had?
Yes, there was. Yesterday I was at the markets with my family, and there was this guy, and he basically had a tent where he was offering like alternative medicines and alternative treatments for addictions, like through herbs and sort of thing. And I started asking him questions like, how can you show any of this works, and how does it work? And like, why don't you want us to use normal mainstream drugs to try and get over addiction? And the guy became super, super duper offended, and I can't understand for the life of me why, because I'm asking him honest questions. I mean, like, I know it was bullshit, but people have got to ask this guy questions. He can't get offended every goddamn time.
Well, unfortunately, they do, and it's much like the religious. I'm sorry, AronRa.
Ah!
You're going to do it one too many times, DPR.
Yeah.
At least he's not saying Aaron.
Well, yeah, there's that. Nobody gets the name right. But anyway, I mean, one of the reaction that I got when, from my babysitters when I was like 8 years old were deeply religious people, and they're indoctrinating me all the time. And I didn't know yet that they were full of shit. And I figured that if I asked them questions, they're going to give me honest answers the way I would if I was going to be transmitting the same sort of thing. And anytime I asked them questions that they didn't have the answers to, I would get scolded harshly. How dare you question? And things like ours is not the reason why, ours is but to do or die. And then, of course, I would ask them to explain that. And then, of course, it goes into the ends justify the means and all this other bullshit. If they don't answer questions, it's not about knowledge, it's not about truth at all, which is amusing because they always use truth with a capital T as often as possible.
You have to remember that it's not being wrong that feels bad, it's admitting you're wrong that feels bad.
I think it's actually finding out that you're wrong feels
right.
bad.
Well, admitting is a big part of that, right? Admitting to yourself that you're wrong. So people will do anything they absolutely can do to avoid admitting or conceding that they are wrong, even when they secretly, somewhere deep down inside themselves, know that to be true. So your question, as unthreatening as it may have seemed to you, was deeply threatening to their personal investment in that pseudoscience or that folk belief. And you cannot lead people who don't care if their beliefs are true. You can never get them there. It's my advice to people who have a good friend who believe in some superstition or some pseudoscience or some deeply held religious belief. You cannot attack them from the front because you're attacking them. You're attacking something that they're so deeply invested in, that their personal well-being is bound up in, that it's the same as calling them hideous names when you say, that's not true. What's the evidence for that? How do you know that's true? You have to start them from the position of, let me ask you, does it matter if this is true or not, or is it something that just makes you feel good and you'd rather not discuss it? Because that's the question. Exactly like that. Is it more important to you that this is true? Do you care if this is true, or is this something that makes you feel good? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think there might be a lag in our I normally wouldn't be stiffing on your lines like this, but I have asked that question of people for whom I know from many previous demonstrations that the belief definitely does matter more than finding out what is really true. But how do you phrase that question to get them to understand what the answer really is?
I mean, play that through with me. Ask me that question, Concordance.
So you've told me about your homeopathy experience, and you're telling me that it helps your grandmother when she was feeling sick. Are you interested in the scientific evidence behind it, or is it just something that you're pretty comfortable with as it is?
I'm very comfortable with it. I've seen it work. I don't need a scientific explanation for it. I've seen how it affected my grandmother and made her better.
Good. See? So your personal experience is probably more important to you than anything that I could show you.
I've seen it happen. I know it works.
Great.
Science can't explain a lot of things, can it? So if science can't explain homeopathy, why should I be bothered?
Can you spell the word anecdote for me?
No, I'm dyslexic.
No, and those are the people that I don't evangelize. I don't proselytize. People have to decide first that it matters whether or not it's true.
No,
right?
no,
if you go up to Gran and you say to Gran, Gran, this is not a real thing. Cutting an onion and putting it under your bed is not going to cure you of the flu. You really have to decide, is that battle worth fighting? You might say to Gran, make sure you're also getting your flu shot. Make sure you go see your doctor and cut the onion. You pick your battles, but someone who is not interested in finding out the right answers, in admitting to being wrong, you're going to end up ruining what could be a friendship or a familial relationship. I don't think there's a big
struggle to think that I could possibly have a friendship with anyone who believed in homeopathy, but there we go. Can I just, again, quickly remind people, it appears that we're being featured. If you're watching from outside, do come and join us. And if you want to appear on the show, I've got one caller after Samuel, and that's it. So you've got a very good chance of appearing on the show. Click on the link in the banner. I know that it appeared as if we were offline for a moment, but we are online and we are taking calls. So do send us a contact request if you would like to appear on the show and discuss pretty much any topic or anything that we've talked about so far. Shall we move on to the next caller, or have we got some more mileage in this?
I think we're ready for a new topic.
But I do have one thing to add to that. When you talk about asking them the question about whether it matters, whether it's really true, I don't see where people are ever going to make that admission if you ask the question. But if you give them the opportunity to voluntarily suggest it, I have heard many times where people have said, these may be what the facts are, but I prefer to believe this. And that's the admission that you're looking for, where people say, why can't we just believe what we want to believe? That's the guy for whom truth literally does not matter.
Or you can ask if they've read the evidence against, or you can talk to them about, whether or not there are other things that they disbelieve that are very similar. How do you feel about Reiki? How do you feel about those people that do crystal healing? You start the analogy and you say, a lot of them swear by it. What are your thoughts on that?
I totally agree with you, but experience, and let me draw the analogy with the religious. And you can say to a Christian, why don't you believe in Allah? Oh, that's absolute stupidity. That's madness. Right. That's crazy.
Right.
Why don't you believe in Buddha? That's nonsense. They're all wrong. I mean, I think you're absolutely spot on when you say that they've got so much personal investment in this that to get them to shift their position is going to take some time. And this is not going to be one question or one statement or anything. Every single person that I've ever spoken to who, about their deconversion account always said that it was a process that involved many years, and there was not one specific thing. There was perhaps a straw that broke the camel's back, but it was an attrition. As I say, I just don't think that there is one simple answer, whether it be Christianity or religion in general, or whether it be homeopathy. I think it's difficult and it takes time.
If you come out saying homeopathy is wrong, then that's a conclusion, and that conclusion has no more merit than homeopathy is right. If you say, are you interested in the test results on homeopathy? Are you interested in clinical reviews on homeopathy? Would it matter to you if the scientific evidence was weighted against it? If you ask that question, if you get a sense of how open they are to the evidence, that decides whether or not your time is well spent or wasted. I don't know that I've ever convinced anyone in a conversation or a single paper. Most people fight against the evidence as long as they possibly can.
I had one question that I thought would have done it. When one of my coworkers, and this is somebody that I really like this guy. He's one of the kindest-hearted people that I've ever known. So I told him when he started asking me questions on skepticism, secularism, atheism, he's genuinely interested in my position and how I come to be this way, and I have to warn him that the things that I tell you, if you inquire of me, are not going to be comfortable. So if you like your current belief system, don't discuss this with me because I respect you and this is the way I want things to be. But he did. He said that he had been told that there was no evidence of evolution, for example, but he had all this evidence of God that he sees, and so why don't I see that? Why don't I accept that? And so I said, okay, well, let me explain it to you in detail then. Let's go exactly on what evidence is. I have to give him a definition for what evidence is, which requires a definition of what facts are. And then, how something is not simply a circular assumption. You're not doing an assumed conclusion. That's not evidence. Your conviction is not evidence. So when I have to go into what really would be counted as objective evidence, now present for me some objective evidence that is positively indicative of your God or supportive of any of the things that you believe, in my perspective, solely on faith. And that question was asked, 3 months ago, and I'm never going to get an answer to that question. And it was one that he thought he already had.
Again, it goes back to something we touched on before. These people won't produce answers, and I don't understand when they're asked a simple question. They know it's a simple question, yes or no, and they will not answer it. Do you think that it gets through to them at all, or do you think their psychology is such that there is such a barrier there that nothing is going to get through to them? I genuinely don't know.
And sometimes they're just looking for any confirmation that they can find, and it doesn't matter what it is. If it seems to line up, if it seems to bolster their belief, that they're happy with that. And when they find out that it doesn't, as I've seen in a couple of tragic cases, they go to pieces, and it's an emotional response, deeply emotional, where grown people will suddenly be reduced to acting like children on a playground.
Okay, on that note, Samuel, thank you very much. I hope the electricity comes back on and you can actually turn the lights on soon. But it's nice to kind of see you in the shadows. Thank you very much indeed. Daniel, are you with us?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Hi.
I don't know if you wanted to move on from homeopathy and all that, but I got a story I'd like to share with you, first before.
Yeah, please do.
Because I lived with somebody who was from China for the last year, and his parents are both traditional, they've studied traditional Chinese medicine, because out there, you can become a doctor basically in traditional Chinese medicine. And the one day I had really, really bad hiccups, and he ran away, and I had hiccups for about half an hour. He ran away and got some dried fruit out of his room, and I was like, oh, it's never going to work. Nothing gets rid of hiccups, and I was stood there for 10 minutes it doesn't matter, don't let me have them, I'm not going to have them, it's not going to work. But I had them anyway, and about a minute or two after I'd eaten this horrible dried fruit, my hiccups stopped. And obviously I don't know whether it was the fruit, pure coincidence, or the psychology of thinking this fruit's going to get rid of my hiccups. But the feeling at that moment of my hiccups gone, and he's given me this weird dry fruit was just it's really puzzling. It's it's a really strange experience, and so it can be quite a strong experience. And unless you think, actually, is that actually what caused it?
I have to tell you, in my family, it was kind of a running joke. The different ways that you could cure hiccups, filling a paper bag full of air and then and smashing it, the sudden shock of the sound, or holding your breath for a minute. I don't remember what the other ones were, jumping up and down, turning around, whatever it was. But there were all these different tricks that you could get to cure hiccups, and of course, about half the time, that would work, because how long do hiccups really last? By the time you start looking to get a cure, you're already toward the end of that anyway. So it's coincidentally going to appear that all kinds of things will cure hiccups.
I just want to agree with Mr. Atheist Guy 1. Drinking water upside down, that was the one that I was always told would work. Concordance.
The one pseudoscience that has been mined by science as actual therapeutic or diagnostic value is herbalism. And traditional Chinese medicine is a heterogeneous mix of, folk herbalism and voodoo. That's the problem. The problem is you've got 1,000 years of well-documented cures that have achieved this sort of semi-religious level of adoption. But about 5% of it is real stuff. Red yeast rice is one of the most classic examples. Red yeast rice contains lovastatin. It is lovastatin. It's a natural product that replicates the exact chemical process of a statin drug. So it is, when you're taking this red yeast rice extract, it's the same thing as taking a generic form of the actual pill form drug. There's a lot of that out there. Now that fruit may have had something about it, and it could have been as simple as absorbing. It actually could have had a slight anesthetic effect, and it could have had a slight paralytic effect, so that it affected the muscles that are involved in the hiccuping. It could also have been the placebo effect, which is a very powerful tool in the hands of a clinician. It's something that doctors have used for decades, centuries, to treat patients. It's just that when it's a life-threatening illness, if you gave me the choice between a combination of dried-up herbs and a purified drug that's been demonstrated and tested to work, I'm going to prefer the demonstrated, tested, purified form of the active compound every time. But for something that is self-limiting, like let's say hiccups or psychosomatic pain, there's no reason why we can't harness our ability to convince ourselves that we're feeling good. Maybe this is the exception to the self-delusion, because it works whether you're a skeptic or not. Getting things like acupuncture for I have non-specific ear pain, as long as a physician has made sure that non-specific ear pain is not some sort of a head and neck cancer, I'm fine with someone getting something that doesn't actually, quote unquote, have an active ingredient being used. And that could have been the case with you. It could have been strictly placebo effect, or it could have been that it had a mild effect on your body as a result of an active agent being produced by a plant.
That reminds me, concordance, this is one of the things that I wanted to ask you about that I couldn't remember before. I told you that I'd sent some emails and some phone calls, and you were out in your busy trips and couldn't respond. One of them was about people that were asking about miracle cures, about people that have experienced stigmata, for example. And are there any actual documented cases of genuine stigmata, or are, like what you're talking about now, when you talk about the Chinese herbalism and the acupuncture, is there ever a case where acupuncture actually does anything positive?
Well,
heck yeah.
Can I give a personal account?
Yes.
Through rowing for many years, I used to have serious lower back problems. And there was one occasion where I'd been suffering for some time. I'd gone to the doctor, I'd gone to a chiropractor, I'd done all sorts of things. I ended up going to an acupuncture, sports acupuncture. And I had 2 sessions with them, and my back got better within about 24 hours. Now, I don't know why or whether it worked. It would appear as if the acupuncture, that's wonderful. No, I'm not particularly convinced. I subsequently had acupuncture to stop me smoking, and that totally failed. So I remain unconvinced, but this is the point. Is there any evidence for any of these things actually working? And it's actually incredibly difficult to measure these things, isn't it?
It's not so hard. We base all of this on biological plausibility. Whenever they do clinical trials of acupuncture, they almost always use something called TENS, which is transepidermal neurostimulation. It's the electrical version of acupuncture. They apply a very small localized charge to the area. Well, that knocks all sorts of neurochemicals free, and you get this immediate pain relief that comes from an actual biochemical change occurring in your body. The same thing is true. It works out that acupuncture works just as well whether you penetrate the skin with a needle or you don't. Now, acupuncture proponents were saying, acupuncture is so effective it doesn't even matter if the needles are there. But the point is, you sit in a quiet room with someone who's spending a lot of time talking with you, very caring voice. Some of these people are very good counselors. And they talk about your stress, and they provide guided imagery. And at the same time, they're providing a pinching feeling. And that pinching feeling is actually releasing endorphins. And you can get up to 24 hours of relief just from the mechanical stimulation that's involved. You might get the same relief from a massage or from a chiropractic treatment. All of these things have a physical component that is very similar to massage with a relaxing environment and personal interaction. Right? Where it doesn't work is where you double blind it, where even the administrator isn't able to know whether they're administering the correct treatment. And in those cases, it's no better than not inserting the needles. In one case, and I've documented this in one of my videos, they used toothpicks. They took a toothpick and they put it and they twirled it against the skin, and the patient had no way of knowing. It was supposed to feel like a needle going in. The patient sits there after having the toothpick prodded at them, and they have the same level of relief as someone who actually received a needle from a trained acupuncturist. So it's not to say that it's completely bogus, but it relies entirely on placebo effect. And if you're trying to relieve someone's cancer or their gallbladder problem or their some sort of chronic disease that needs medical treatment, that's when the harm really comes in.
Now, see, for me, the placebo effect is the same thing as not doing anything at all. I mean, it could be, look at all the different ways that you can do a placebo effect. You know, any number of rituals or spells, or as you put it, I mean, it might even be possible to achieve some degree of relief from a good prostitute. You know, how does this qualify as medicine?
It's not medicine. It's or rather, it's not science-based medicine. Right? It's not even evidence-based medicine. It's a traditional medical practice. And I don't think that there's much of a role for that in modern medicine, but I think that we can't entirely discard some value that can be gained from it.
I do want to come back to a point that Aaron made, but I have to say what a wonderful comment Dave 858 made in the chat. Medical prostitution, I like that idea. Aaron, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you were saying when you said that the placebo is the same as the real thing.
No, not as the placebo is. It can be demonstrated with sugar pills, but it can also be demonstrated with, as he said, with acupuncture, with a soothing voice from a counselor. It can be generated with a ritual spell of whatever it is that you might want to respond to if you're already predisposed to responding to some particular kind of, herbal magic or whatever. You can duplicate the placebo effect with practically anything. It's a minor manipulation. So when I ask for whether acupuncture is actually doing anything, he said yes, but in fact it's no. I mean, because placebo to me doesn't count as anything.
I don't think that's entirely fair. I mean, I'm no fan of pseudoscience or alternative medicine, but sometimes a shoulder to cry on is what some people are looking for, or someone to care about their pain. And in some cases,
I'm not arguing that. But
I'm saying it actually provides a physical type of relief through psychological means. There is some suggestion that a lot of what we might call evidence-based medicine has much more of a placebo component than you might think. Things like antidepressants may have a significant contribution to their therapeutic effect, is in a large case through the suggestion that it would work.
Okay,
people
well then let me
see themselves as less depressed.
Let me clarify this.
Again, I just want to clarify what you're saying, Aaron, because, for example, it seems to be known that the placebo effect does have an effect, and even to the extent of the larger the pill that a patient is given, or the colour that it is given, will have an effect. So it does seem to be measured. It does seem to be real. So I'm not fully understanding.
Okay. Then let me clarify. If a placebo works, and I acknowledge that for the reasons that Concordance is describing, a placebo will work, but that doesn't give any specific significance to the acupuncture, because I could duplicate that same effect, or maybe I don't have the personable skills to do this, but I know people that would be able to do that same sort of thing with an herbalism treatment, or with reading your auras, or with any number of, as I said, rituals of pseudoscience, if you're predisposed to embrace that sort of thing. If you're one of those neo-pagan types, then one of these other spells will probably work on you. And it would be equally valid as acupuncture, meaning that acupuncture doesn't have any validity beyond the placebo, and it doesn't have any validity beyond the witchcraft.
Sorry, Concordance, I'll let you address that point, but I know that Daniel, I think, actually had another point, and we're coming up to the hour. So Concordance, then we'll move on to Daniel's second point.
We're like 0 for 4 on answering questions here. I know what you mean, Aaron. if someone's charging $80 for an acupuncture treatment or $120 for a chiropractic treatment that could be substituted for, let's say, going in and getting a nice massage for $15, then the harm there is the additional cost and the self-delusion that comes with, only chiropractic can treat my condition. Or if it's a gateway belief into these other new age type of things, I can see the additional harm there. I think massages are highly underutilized as a therapeutic modality for a wide variety of self-limiting conditions. I also worry that if we give any leeway to an alternative medicine practice, they take a mile. They end up saying they can treat asthma, and they can treat diabetes, and they can cure cancer, and they can cure AIDS. And then you've got a bunch of people walking out, through no fault of their own, who are deluded into believing that they're cured or treated, or that there's something wrong with them, that they're still feeling pain. I understand where you're going.
Okay. Well, you mentioned a massage. I mean, let's not discount, when you massage the bottom of your foot, and because everything in your body, every element you have, can be controlled and manipulated with a massage to the bottom of your foot, right?
No, I thought you were just going to say that there are mechanoreceptors. When you are getting a massage, you are releasing chemicals in your brain as a result of that pleasurable sensation. That's a chemical change from a strictly psychological, / mechanical. There's a slight mechanical component to it that has an actual effect. There's an actual chemical response to things like having your back pop, which is all chiropractors do. But there's some chemical effect, even if it's just a little bit. Where they overstep their bounds is when they start treating things that don't have to do with feeling better or getting your back popped. When they start talking about childhood asthma and diabetes, then we have.
That was the advantage that I had over many people in my family. I mean, when I was a little boy, again, 7 or 8 years old, and somebody took me to a chiropractor, and I asked him to explain, and he starts talking. He was one of the type that talked about how he could cure everything from, emphysema. I mean, what could be cured with adjusting your spine somehow. And I remember raising an eyebrow to him because I can't find a correlation. There's not a mechanism between the spine and the lung disorder and other things that he's talking about that he could cure. Right. And the other people in my family, for some reason, that flag never flew. They never knew to be suspicious of that somehow.
I mean, if I'm going to get a placebo, it's going to be a massage, not a prostitute, because that's just wrong. But
I think you can satisfactorily combine the two. I don't think there's any problem with that. But I'm with you. I think a massage is absolutely wonderful. But I'm sorry, I am going to insist that we move on to Daniel's next point, because this is what I was interested in now. Finally, this always happens. I'm inundated with contact requests. Daniel, what was the main point that you wanted to raise?
I wanted to talk about Nigel Farage. I know DPR will know who he is, but I don't believe Concordance and Aaron will know who it is. But he's like the leader of the UKIP party. He's like the same party which Viscount Monkton was like a high-profile member of. They're quite Eurosceptic and like quite right-wing. But it's his position on climate change that I really wanted to talk about, because I think it's quite anti-science, really. Like in talks that he makes, he says that don't quote me on this. I don't really know anything, but here's my opinion. Wink, wink. And like he says things like that it's doubtful that CO2 causes global warming. The temperature hasn't changed since 1998, and all these sort of things. And it's quite, like, I think it's quite scary for what could be Britain's third political party, like who would be deciding perhaps the next parliament, like the next government, that their leader holds such anti-science beliefs, really.
Welcome to the club, Daniel. Welcome to the U.S. club.
Yeah. Remember that Concordance and I are both speaking from Texas.
Well, it's a point that I've made several times before, and I'm sorry, I knew at some stage I was going to have to show this off. I didn't realise that I was due for an upgrade on my phone, and I actually last week got a a Samsung Galaxy. Wow, what incredible technology. I won't show it off, it's okay. But it really irritates me because the sort of people who will be spreading misinformation about science are probably using things like this. They're certainly taking advantage of all the scientific advancements in a whole host of areas, including medicine, entertainment, technology, communications, internet, and the like. And it's the same with the theists. They will accept and embrace and utilize all of these benefits, save in those areas that disagree with their dogma, such as geology, whether the Earth is 6,000 years old or a little bit different, 13.5 billion years old. Why is it that they should be allowed to do this? I think it's a disgrace.
Yeah, I just want to point out my Samsung Rugby smartphone just arrived 2 days ago.
The Magic Sandwich Show is sponsored by Samsung.
No, but let's get on point. I think it's a serious point. Why should these people diss science when it doesn't suit them and embrace all the benefits that it gives them when it does suit them?
Yeah, well, it's just like geology. When you mentioned, but it's not that they object to science. They don't think that they do. They're picking and choosing from science the way they pick and choose from the Bible. They will find they have the confirmation bias. Whatever seems to align with their perspective, that's what they embrace, and everything that doesn't is simply pushed out the way. Glenn Morton wrote that article, Morton's Demon, talking about how this works and how you can actually maintain two completely mutually exclusive positions this way by not allowing certain information in that contradicts the position that you desire.
I think a little differently. I think that the technology doesn't require an understanding of the science. That's what's different. And in fact, that's not universal. There are a lot of technologies that require that you understand the science behind them. And they are not consumer-driven, product-driven technologies. Things like computers. When you first had computers, they were in large rooms, and only the occasional person knew about them, and people were scared of them. Same thing about robotics. When robotics were something exotic and strange that people did in physics labs or maybe occasionally on a manufacturing line, people were scared of them. We see them in the horror movies. And then suddenly everybody had a Roomba, right? And everybody had a robot vacuuming their carpet. They didn't need to understand how robotics worked. They just worked. So I actually think there is a gap between people who appreciate the principles of science and those who can appreciate the value of the technology without ever truly changing their own viewpoints. You will hear people who object to stem cell technology, but use it. You will hear people that object to Wi-Fi. There's too much electronics around, but at the same time they whip out their cell phones. So I think you're talking about Morton's Demon. I think that's a great example too. But I think that people who are inherently anti-science can still benefit from the technology without ever truly appreciating the irony of what they're doing and what they're saying.
There may be another aspect of this too that I think is actually worse. Is that and anyone in Texas is going to know this pretty well. The degree to which people are incurious. I have heard it said a number of times, when I bring up any kind of a lofty concept, if I'm not talking about football, some topical event that was just on the news, or something of that level, if I start talking about the advances of science, beyond that, if I'm talking about anything on a loftier plane, then the comments that I get is that if it doesn't involve how much food goes on my table tonight, then I don't need to know about it.
I think you're absolutely right, Aaron. I wouldn't disagree with you. I think it's a great shame because, as I've said before, I find science fascinating, and it frustrates me that my mental capacities are such that I will never fully understand a lot of which that I would love to understand. But it's intriguing, and I love reading about it. I love hearing about it. That curiosity doesn't seem to be shared with a lot of people, and I don't understand why.